Welcome to the video tutorials by Indus Gurukul. Today's topic is digestive system. To understand what digestive system is, first let's understand what digestion is. It's nothing but it involves the breakdown of food particles from bigger to smaller substances, components in fact, so that they can be easily absorbed and assimilated into the body. As you can see, the definition says over here, the digestion involves the breakdown of food into smaller and smaller components until they can be absorbed and assimilated into the body. And the parts which all are involved in this process of digestion together is known as the digestive system. You can very well see in the picture which helps us to understand what a digestive system looks like. It's half the part of it, the chemical process where it takes place. You can see the esophagus, liver, the stomach, the intestines, the colon and the rectum. So let's proceed further to understand the different parts which are involved in this system. You can see its teeth, tongue, saliva, intestines, large and small, liver, gallbladder, pancreas, appendix, rectum, stomach, esophagus, anus and villus. Apart from all of these, a few elements like the saliva, the appendix and the villus will be a little unknown to children. Saliva is not an organ, it's an enzyme. It's the saliva which is there in your mouth, is released and it produces enzymes which further helps in the breakdown of the food particles. Whereas appendix, in today's world, it's there in vertebrates, especially the sapiens that we are derived from, the Homo sapiens. It used to have tails. As of now, it's in the fused form present in the human body, which has no functionalities. But still, it's the part of the digestive system, supposed to be. Villus, a little small part which is mentioned present in the small intestine, helps in the absorption, better absorption of the food particles as it provides extra space. So we understand and we know it very clearly that how the teeth, tongue and the different parts helps in. It's very understood for everyone how the teeth helps in to break down the food particles into smaller pieces. The tongue which helps in to move the food back and forth into the esophagus. Saliva, it helps in dissolving all the molecules of the matter that we eat, which is actually 99% water. It releases enzymes which chemically breaks down the food process. The small intestine plays a bigger role. It's like a coiled tube-like organ, 20 feet long. It can be as long as 20 feet. It's so much so coiled closely that it can be accommodated in a small place like the stomach or abdomen that we have. This is where the most of the nutrients is taken up by the body. So most absorption or digestion takes place in the small intestine. With the help of villas or a villi in plural, because these villi are nothing but finger-like projections which help in providing the more larger surface area for absorptions. Further, the largest organ, the liver, which produces bile, which helps in the breakdown of fat molecules to digest the fat which we eat to the food. The gallbladder releases bile and they all release bile. Pancreas release enzymes like pancreatic juices. They all dump into the small intestine directly. Further, from the small intestine, the colon, larger intestine mostly absorbs the liquid which is left over from the undigested food. The rectum, where the entire solid waste is stored. And finally, the anus, the opening where through the sphincters that we can keep it or make it outside, the feces. Through this diagram, you can understand the entire detailing of the different glands and the different organs and the sphincters. Like over here, the first process that takes place through the salivary glands inside the oral cavity, that is inside the mouth. With the help of the tongue, the different glands which secrete different enzymes like saliva, through the saliva. The pharynx, which is the food pipe, where the further the food goes down to esophagus, and from the esophagus to the stomach. The stomach enlarged, you can see there are two sphincters. One, the orifice where it's connecting from the esophagus to the stomach, and the other from the stomach to the small intestine through the activity of duodenum. So you can see now further that it goes inside the small intestine. Now the small intestine actually is divided into three parts: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. The tip where the small intestine starts is named as duodenum, the middle section as jejunum, and the ending where it is attached with the colon or the larger intestine, you can see over here, is known as the ileum. Okay. Now you can see very clearly the hat-like structure over here, which is in brown, is the liver. A small capsule-like structure over here in the green is a gallbladder, which stores and releases bile directly into the stomach. And then you have the pancreas, the pancreatic juice. Now these directly flows their juices into the small intestine. Okay. Now understanding the functionality of the digestive system is very simple, that it is turning the bigger food particles into simpler sugars, amino acids, and carbohydrates. Now this acts, or this provides fuel for the human body, and this merely happens in three stages. The stages of digestions. The first is in the mouth and the teeth, which helps in the grinding up of the food, the chewing, the breaking them into smaller particles, and further moving the food in swallowing motion. Swallowing the how happens by how the way you can push the food towards the esophagus. Now this happens through a wave-like motion in the food to the stomach. Now this is in further you will read, this motion is called peristalsis. Now in the mouth, what happens, there are two phases like mechanical digestion, the chemical digestion. Now mechanical, as the name sounds, very simply chewing of the mandible of the teeth by the teeth, which breaks down the food into smaller particles, whereas the chemical digestion, where through the saliva the different enzymes released like amylase, mucin, further breaks down the food and it makes them even simpler. A tooth is a hard calcified structure found in the jaws of many vertebrates, and it is used to break down the food mechanically. That's the tool for mechanical breakdown. Okay, and it is placed in each sockets, which is called the gums. Every separate socket for each tooth you have, and the tooths are of different names. Okay, they're different types: molars, premolars, incisors, and canines. Different shapes and different functionalities. Digestive glands, like you have specialized secretory cells, mainly the glands we're talking about, which again releases enzymes. Okay, for example, the sublingual, the mandibular, the parotid, accessory parotid glands, and they're found in the inner, also found in the inner alimentary canal of the accessory organs. The second stage happens in the stomach, where the food is broken down. The stomach actually finally churns the food, that is mixing of the food, through the gastric juices, which is secreted inside the stomach. Majorly HCl, which is also known as hydrochloric acid, you will learn in the further classes. This is done with the gastric juices, so we call in the common name, and these juices break down the proteins, and then the food is further passed into the small intestines. Now food is temporarily after digestion is stored here with the entire breakdown of the particles into smaller molecules. Now here in the stomach you have gastric juices which are secreted and has layers of muscles lying inside. Mechanically and chemically the food is broken down over here in both sense, and in this entire process the elasticity of the stomach such that you can expand it to 2 liters of food. So here this benefits, as in even if you have a little amount of food, when it is digested or broken down, the entire process, the entire thing expands, and the stomach has the capability of expanding through its inner muscle lining. The second stage, where the breakdown happens in the stomach and with the help of the accessory organs like the liver, pancreas, gallbladder, as we mentioned earlier, all these secrete juices and they directly drip into the small intestine through the diagram over here. You can see the gallbladder releases bile over here and directly falls into the duodenum, which is a part of the small intestine. Similarly, the pancreas through the pancreatic juice gets into over here, and the liver also gives the juice directly into the duodenum, which is the small intestine. So the function of the liver, as we mentioned, it produces bile. Now bile is stored in the gallbladder until needed. It breaks up the fat. Now it means the kind of food that we take up, if it has fat content into it, bile is required to break up the fat molecules. Unless and until we don't consume fat, bile is not required. So the word over here, until needed, it simply means that it only depends on the food type that we are having. If we are having fat, then bile would be released to further break down of the fat molecules. So the pancreas, another organ, it is supposed to be called an organ because it has the capability of producing hormones as well. And the difference, we must be knowing the difference between a gland and an organ. A gland secretes enzymes, whereas the organ also releases hormones. So pancreas does release hormones and digestive juices or enzymes as well. So it's the majorly all the nutrients are digested by the pancreatic juices. Nearly all digestion occurs mostly in the small intestine. Major digestion is completed in the small intestine only. The gallbladder is nothing but a small green colored pouch which you can see over here, just below the liver. It concentrates and stores the bile juice, which as and when required fills in or pours into the duodenum, that is in the small intestine. As we said earlier, the coil structure, small intestine is like a very closely, densely coiled structure which expands, if expanded, can go up to the length of 20 feet long. This small intestine absorbs the nutrients from the food. Most digestion takes place in the duodenum and the small intestine. The small finger-like projections, as we learned earlier, is the villi, which helps in the further larger surface absorption of the nutrients in a lesser time. These nutrients which is absorbed are then passed into the bloodstream. Now, most chemical digestion takes place here in the small intestine. The simpler sugars and proteins are absorbed into the inner linings of the small intestines itself and further passed on to the bloodstream directly. The fatty acids and the glycerol further does not go to the bloodstream. They in fact go to the lymphatic systems. The villi, the entire inner lining of the small intestine is lined with villi. Small surfaces, we have been learning this very often from the past. Now the function of the small intestine is very clearly the absorption, because if major absorption happens over here, the chemical digestion, that is it's a major organ for digestion and absorption, and it's in the meters, it's all over 6 meters. It's huge surface area, around 300 meters squares. You can measure that, as we mentioned over here, it can be even the size of a tennis court. Now, most absorption happens through the walls without any need for special adaptations except the villi, which just increases the surface area of the small intestine and thus providing better absorption of materials. And 90% of our daily fluid intake is absorbed in the small intestine. Almost 90%, which is huge. The solid materials then passes through the large intestine. Now here, the undigestible solid fibers, okay, is passed on, which cannot be digested through the small intestine, is further pushed on further, which is in the colon or the larger intestine. Now colon's functionality over here is to absorb the liquid, majorly the water, is major absorption happens over here, apart from whatever is a residue. Whereas we have learned in the small intestine, 90% of it already happens in the small intestine. Whatever is left is being absorbed in the large intestine, but mind you, in colon there is no absorption of the nutrients which happens over here. Mostly water or liquid is absorbed. Vitamins like K and B are also reabsorbed with the water. Now the solid waste again being stored in the rectum of the body. It passes out only on the human intervention through the anus, which is the exterior opening to the faces of the human body. Now the function, as we mentioned, reabsorption of water. We use 9 liters of water every day in digestive juices. The entire body uses 9 liters of water, which is more than 90% of the water is reabsorbed by the body. So in short, you can understand, out of the 9 liters that we contribute in making digestive juices of our body, apart from of the 9 liters, 90% of the water is again reabsorbed by the body. Now in this process, if the body is unable to absorb enough water, then more water content will be there in the colon, which further makes a disease called diarrhea, leads into a situation where you have passing liquidy stools, which is diarrhea. Whereas on the reverse, if too much water is being absorbed by the colon, the feces which is there, the undigested particles which is there, it has got less water content, which makes it a situation called constipation. So this is what is the entire digestive system in a nutshell. Thank you.